Welcome to Cannon Cockers Talk. This is Mike Marletto joining me today. We've got James Corona coming from the great state of Texas, Mark Quimby from down south in Alabama, and Mike Hewitt up in the land of 10,000 lakes in Minnesota. Today we're going to be talking about the first 24 hours of Operation Iraqi Freedom I, which has gone down in history as the Opening Gambit. Before we do that, I want to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves. Tell us a little about yourself. I've introduced myself on previous episodes. Again, Mike Marletto, I was the commanding officer of the 11th Marines during Operation Iraqi Freedom. So James, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, it's James Corona, born and raised down here in Texas. Joined 11th Marines. Well, I joined the Marine Corps right in 2000, right out of high school. I got to 11th Marines in February of 2001. And as soon as I got there, before I even got there, they told us prepare for war because we're going to go do something soon. And we were doing preparations for 15th New Deployment. I was on that for the 9/11 attacks. We were in Darwin, Australia. 40 now. Old man, I'm into ranching and welding. Got kids that are, in college. Got a buddy of mine, Favela, who was another gun bunny with me. He's got a son who's a 0311 right now out in Camp Horno. So, yeah, we're getting old.
Makes you feel old.
It does.
James, you were a Beastmaster in Bravo Battery, and you were a Cannoneer 0811. Is that correct?
Yes, I was a Beastmaster from 01 to 04. I went up from being a powder monkey, working on the powder canisters, all the way up to being a section chief before I left. So I did everything on that you could think of on the gun line.
In Operation Iraqi Freedom, what position did you have on the guns?
We weren't as stacked as we hoped we would have been. We kind of shared billets. I was the #1 cannoneer. Also helped out with the powder and the ammo team.
Okay.
And in some occasions, I was the gunner / a gunner.
Okay, Mark's got. I think you've got a unique story on how you joined the 11th Marines. But tell us a little about yourself, Mark.
Sure. Mark Quimby. Like I said, I'm down here in Birmingham, Alabama. I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, and grew up in Meridian, Mississippi. So I'm just stretching myself thin across the south of Mason-Dixon. But I was an art major in a junior college. And when 9/11 happened and I couldn't focus anymore, it got under my skin so much. I figured I'm in good shape and a patriotic-minded individual. So one day I just left work and went to the recruiting station, told them to send me somewhere. And as you all know from your experience, that's exactly what they'll do. And so I joined the Marine Corps in August 2002 on my birthday. Don't show up to Paris Island on your birthday, just word to the wise there. And, went through 2311 Ammo Tech School in Huntsville, went through MCT, and then was going to Camp Pendleton, obviously, to join 11th Marines. I was going to Headquarters Battery. And when I got there, I realized I was the only person there in digital camouflage. In fact, I was called Tetris and Nintendo a lot because I looked so different than everyone else. And I found out that you fine gentlemen were on a ship somewhere heading towards Kuwait. And so 6 days later, I was on a plane, beat y'all to Kuwait, was put on the buses, driven out to the desert and to this humongous tent. I'm sure you all remember that we were in. And they dropped me off and said, here's your unit. And I went in there and no one was there. So for 4 or 5 days, I was the commanding officer of 11th Marines in country because planes are faster than ships. And so PFC Quimby held down the fort for a few days and had to fight for rations and stand in line at the water tank to get water because I didn't have a unit to report to, which was very interesting. And then here all you show up and old school desert tricolors and tan boots, and I've got desert digitals and brown suede boots, and everyone knew who the boot was, and so that was my entry to the Marine Corps and into 11th Marines, and never looked back.
Okay, Mike.
I joined the Marine Corps in 1984. First unit was Alpha 111. Spent 3/4 of my career at Las Pulgas as an 0811. Spent 17 or 18 plus years of it in the artillery community. Instructor at Fort Sill for 3 years as well. So 111, 511, back to 111, Alpha Battery, Sierra Battery, Charlie Battery, Headquarters Battery, ATS instructor. Finally, where I wound up at was I didn't want to deploy again, and I knew it was going to happen. I was about 16 years in. Didn't have any B billets under my belt at that point, so I volunteered to become the 111 career planner, which in turn I eventually wound up at as a regimental career planner, and that's what I did in during the push to Iraq. I was working reenlistment packages for all the enlisted folks in 11th Marines.
And were you riding shotgun with the XO? Or
I was, yep.
Lieutenant Colonel Malillo?
Lieutenant Colonel Mike Marletto was the XO. I was in the back seat, and Lance Corporal Ortiz was our driver. Funny story with me and Lieutenant Colonel Malillo. We go back to we were boots together in Alpha 111. I was a private when he checked in as a second lieutenant and the FDO, and we deployed twice together in Alpha Battery.
Oh, so, that's great.
Yep.
And I got to point out, Mike was not only a career planner, he was the career planner of career planners in 1st Marine Division. I think every year he was the regimental career planner. The regiment won the Guadalcanal Trophy, which is given out to the unit in the division that has the highest retention rate. And I know both years I was there, Mike brought that trophy home for 11th Marines. So it was great working with you on that.
One regret was that I went to Iraq as the career planner and not as a battery gunnery sergeant. That's the one thing that to this day I wish I would have spoken up, but I didn't want to step on his toes. But I can't remember his last name. I can picture him. The staff sergeant from 211 when Gunny J got sent back stateside, and there was a battery out there that had a staff sergeant filling a gunny's billet. I was the only 0811 gunny in country, and I should have filled that billet. But
Well, thanks for taking one for the team, because once again, we won the Guadalcanal Trophy again. I'm not sure it would have happened had you not stayed there. So we hit the ground in Kuwait. We're in the desert. Of course, many of us had spent plenty of time in the desert in Southern California, 29 Palms, maybe even some trips out to Yuma. But what do you think of the desert in Kuwait, Southern Kuwait and Iraq? Did you, was it just, hey, another, just like being in 29 Palms, or did you find anything different? James?
I'd rather be in Kuwait and Iraq. I mean, 29 Palms, for lack of better words, sucks. Yeah, I mean, it just sucks.
So what'd you like? What was better about the desert in Kuwait?
The ground not being 147-degree temperature. I remember that was we used to put the canister, thermometer from the canister, and we put them in the sand to see how hot it got in 29 Palms. At one time, we got it up to 147 under the caminet. But when we were in Kuwait and Iraq, it was just a little bit different, I guess. The wind blew a little bit more. The only thing I didn't like was dust storms or sand in just about every nook and cranny.
Well, we also were there in the cool part of the year, because I can guarantee you from my second trip over there, the summertime gets pretty sporting temperature-wise.
Yeah.
Mark, you didn't have a chance to go to 29 Palms, but as a guy that came from down south, what do you think of your first experience hitting the desert?
Well, I'd never really traveled anywhere outside of the tri-state area I had lived in as a child. So it was my first exposure to what people now call dry heat. So I grew up in hot and humid. And so it was the first time I'd ever been in an environment like that, from the topography, the flora, fauna, nothing. It was like an alien world to me. And it was certainly very, very hot. But as I came to learn later with double caxes and Yumas, that it can get hotter than it was there. And I was really surprised, actually, when we made it to Iraq, how similar the weather was. If I closed my eyes, to where I was used to growing up, the temperature, the humidity, it was very similar to Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana. So I was surprised by that after being in such a dry area in Kuwait. I will never forget the bus ride to out there to that tent I was telling you about, and listening to the radio on the way. And like I said, this is such a new place. I'd never been anywhere before. And listening to the radio, it would be a Britney Spears song and then a song in Arabic. And it was almost overwhelming how different everything was to anything I'd ever been in. And to think at the time I'm rolling through Kuwait, counting boot camp. I'd been in the Marine Corps for 5.5, 6 months, and 3 months of that's Paris Island. I mean, I'd never done anything, and never even. I'll remember sitting around. We finally took that Republican Guard base in Iraq, and we were there. And I remember everybody sitting around the first time we'd ever geared down and had a fire, and everybody was talking about, don't y'all miss Las Pulgas? I even missed 29 Palms. And I remember they got to me. I'd finally earned my keep. Right, I was meritoriously promoted to Lance Corporal. I was still the Buddhist, but they had fought with me at this point, and I had earned some credibility. And everybody looks at me, and I'm like, and I'm sure I threw some colorful metaphors in there. I've never even been to Las Pulgas. So it was a reminder to everyone that I really was the Buddhist guy in the Marine Corps.
Ouch.
Mike, you obviously had quite a few trips out to the desert, and maybe even on some floats had seen some other deserts around the world. What were your thoughts about Kuwait?
Yeah, I had been to the region previously with Charlie Battery in '99. Played around in the Gulf a little bit on just a normal deployment. To me, the biggest, when you just ask a question, close your eyes, the biggest difference is the topography. Flat and nothing, where, compared to rocky and looking around and stuff. And the one thing I think to myself is that should have been different is, digging a trench slit to sleep in or something in Kuwait or in Iraq. That ground should have been softer is all I could think. When you're swinging a pickaxe or something out there, that ground was hard. When you look at it and you think, if I was, had a gun out there, or was acting in an 08-11 capacity and digging trails, I would be swinging that pick and thinking this should be easier than this, because everybody knows it sucks to drive stakes in or do something in 29 Palms because you're hitting so many rocks half the time. So
let's talk about the movement of 111 out to the field. Last time we talked about the fact that we on our last session we talked about all the types of things that happened when we arrived in country. The batteries went out, did calibration, calibrated the tubes that had come off the MPF shipping. Then we did some battalion level exercises. And then we had a large regimental fire X to kind of get us ready to go. But one of the things we had to do is when you got up to the border between Iraq and Kuwait, there was a large, basically there was a fence along the border that the Kuwaitis had put up. And then on the Kuwait side of that was a large berm. It was probably 20 feet high that they had piled up all this sand. So you had this huge berm that you had to go through in order to get to the border. And then in many cases on the other side, there was a berm that the Iraqis had built. So you almost had kind of a no man's land between there. As we were gearing up, the decision was made that they were going to push engineer assets out there and start making cuts in the Kuwaiti side of the berm to expedite us getting across the border. So those operations started in early March, and initially 511 was sent out along with some counter battery radars. And also we sent our regimental forward CP out. And the mission we had was to provide protection for those engineers that were cutting through the berm. And General Mattis had told me, and our direction was, if any of the Iraqis fire into Kuwait and shoot at any of the folks that are doing that berm reduction, we were supposed to immediately engage them. So, essentially 11th Marines, starting on the 5th of March, we were the forward tip of the 1st Marine Division. And, we were really at war, although it was a Cold War at that point. So 511 went out there, and then on the 9th, 511 came back to do their final preparations, and 111, moved forward in order to provide, that support. So, James, what were you guys thinking? Here you are rolling out a Matilda, you're going forward, and
we kind of treated it as if it was just a regular field op. It didn't feel like much. It didn't feel it because we knew they said we're gonna go out there for 3 weeks and we're gonna come back, we're gonna get shit, shower, shave, get all cleaned up, and then we're gonna see what happens after that. But when you're on the gun line, you hardly get intel about what's actually going on. So we found out we were gonna rotate back. So we had a couple of days before we rotated back, and then all of a sudden they were like, "Hey guys, we're not going to go back now." And we're like, "What? Like, we stink! Like, come on, why can't we go back?" And they're like, "Yeah, I think we're, President Bush is gonna make an announcement that we're gonna go into war." And we're like, "Nah, whatever." It still didn't click. Things weren't clicking right. And well, actually, before when 511 was out there, we had sent out an ant farm that would go out, and they would be kind of in the middle of the engineers and the regiment or the battalions out there, and they would support the communications. So I actually got to go and do that. They needed some OE11s to kind of go out there for security and protect the ant farm and make sure the comm stays up. And I actually got to do that. And when I got back from that, the very next day, I was right back out there again doing the counter battery stuff. So I was already there. I guess you can say I had already got complacent with it. And I was just like, okay, I'm here, whatever. It doesn't seem like much. And then they gave us a word, and Captain Galerter would always have this book, called it the Good Book. And it was he'd read passages from past wars and all the way back to Sun Tzu times. And he would read those out, and one of them happened to be about the Spartans, and it was about a stick breaking ceremony. So we had already got the word that we're not going back, we're going to push in. So he's like, we're going to do a stick breaking ceremony where half of the stick you write down your family side, the other half of the stick you write down what your warrior side is, what makes you a warrior and what makes you a family man. And he brought half the battery, went 50-50, half the battery went up to the exo pit, and we did a prayer. And we did the stick breaking ceremony.
I'm going to stop you right here because we're gonna talk about what happened in that ceremony.
Yeah, and so that's up to that point. It was almost, we had just fired those reds, the Charge 7 red bag, and all that stuff for that regimental training exercise. So we were just like, man, we were happy. You don't ever get to see a red bag. It's not very often to see a red bag or a big old white bag.
Well, you got to see plenty of those, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Sure.
Mark, again, you didn't have a lot of experience, but all of a sudden, you're loading, seeing the battalion loading up for bear as an ammo tech. I think you're probably seeing possibly every round that the artillery can shoot. So what were your thoughts as you were going forward?
Well, at this point, it was really starting to sink in for me. I had a very different perspective from the how little time I'd spent in. And when we finally did drive through that berm, I was on a 240 Golf on top of a truck, and I spent most of that deployment, and behind a machine gun. That the only time I'd ever shot it was at MCT, up until the real thing, I guess you could call it. And it was really just, it was surreal, that here I am sitting on this truck behind a machine gun, driving into this country I'd heard about my whole life. I remember being a kid in church and in our community, that some of the guys that had gone to Desert Storm, I never even considered the military, but I always thought about those people as these like giants to me. They were like superhuman because they had been to war. It was just, I can't even describe really the sort of fascination I had with this, that kind of armed combat, and that's sort of like the pinnacle of what it's the best and the worst of us, war really is. And meeting people that did that. And then here I am, not even a half a year removed from being an art major at a community college in Mississippi. And I'm sitting on a 240 Golf right into the Iraq for war. It was so surreal. It transcended fear. And don't get me wrong, there were plenty of moments of fear in that deployment and in future deployments. But it was the most surreal moment I've ever felt in my life.
Mike, I think you went forward with the XO at the forward CP. And I think all of you that were out in the field at that point on the 12th of March, a big sandstorm, blew in. So Mike, what was your reaction to that event? Tell us about that.
The sandstorm or the counter battery stuff.
Well, you can talk about both, but I want to go ahead.
Okay.
Floor.
Yeah. Well, no, it was knew it was real. I mean, I knew it was going to happen at some point anyway. We weren't all there as long as we were, and something wasn't going to happen. But when we did move forward, like you said, sir, with the XO, got out there. A couple of the pictures that I posted on the OIF II webpage here that I kind of put together of me standing in that trench that I'm talking about, Colonel Marletto standing over the hood. Those were photos that were taken out there. You can see the ant farm in the distance, so that was all like, a day or two, I guess, before, we did go through the berm or the DMZ, as I considered it, because it was, like you said, it was clearly too, it was no man's land. It was a demilitarized zone in the middle there. But yeah, the sandstorms, I'm kind of curious looking over your shoulder there at your, must be your retirement plaque. The one with the,
it's orange. Yeah.
Yep, the orange one. I'm wondering if that's one of the ones that I took, because that was one of the other things that I did. I did while on that deployment as a career planner, because I was doing reenlistments and stuff. I probably had the only digital camera that was regimental property that went along on that. And it was the old school digital camera where you stuck a 3.5-inch floppy disk in it. You wrote the files to the disk, and then I put it away. And then when we got back home, I downloaded all those pictures. But yeah, the sandstorms sucked, but there's a sandstorm from hell to talk about later on here.
Yeah.
So
James, what did you think of that first blow when it came whipping through?
I can tell you a lot of profanity that was going through my head and coming out of my mouth for no apparent reason. But oh man, I've never been in anything like that. It's kind of hard to describe, but when you're driving and you lose your goggles and you tell people, yeah, I had to use my Camelback to rinse my eyeballs out, and they're like, oh, it can't be that bad. Like, yeah, it is. It's like that picture that y'all see in the orange. That's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Like they're like, what? That's not nighttime or dusk. I'm like, no, dude, that's like midday. It sucked. Sand was everywhere, and the weirdest thing is just watching it roll in. It's like an apocalyptic scene. It's crazy.
I've had people see that picture and ask me, hey, that's a great picture. What kind of filter was that shot with?
That's Earth.
That's
It's
no
Earth.
filter. That's what it looked like out there. Was if you've seen the movie The Martian,
Yep.
that's exactly what it looked like, the orange planet. So
Yeah, it felt like we were on Mars. To kind of go back when you asked me that question about what did it feel like as far as heading out to the berm, I had a commanding officer or company or battery commander that was, man, to this day, we still respect this guy. He's probably about this big, but when you think of him, you think of him as a giant. Joe Russo. who's actually retiring in Bella Wood this year, I think June, but he would train us to the point where we thought we were sitting there in Las Pocas running up the side of sheep shit with freaking logs from ATS. And when we did our vehicle operations, when we were going from one position to the next, he would sit out there, lay down in the middle of the road and act like a casualty and cause a blocked ambush. So he trained us to the point where when we got out there, it felt less threatening than what he put us through. And he set us up so well for going. And then coming back, we had already, Bravo Beastmasters were probably the only ones that I can think of were combat that already seen it, because we were out there with Bravo Battery was what 9/11. So we had already seen the combat and we've already been there, done that. So, but when we went back out there, it was just like, oh, it's another field op for us. Gonna go out there, everybody's gonna come home.
So on let's roll forward now. On the 17th of March, the division issues its frag order, and the division and the rest of the regiment starts rolling out to the field. And then on the 18th, and the other thing that happened on the 17th is the Iraqi forces were declared hostile. So it looked like things were getting ready to go. Originally, the original plan was the attack was going to go on the 21st, March 21st, with a H-hour of 0300 Zulu.
Saffron Hill.
So that was the original plan. Now on the 18th, something significant happened, and that's we all went into MOPP 2. And I don't think any of us expected that we were going to be in MOPP 2 for the next 3 weeks. But for one thing, I think it might have taken care of, James, your issue with showers. But talk about what it felt like getting mopped up there. And if I was, go ahead and I'll let Mark start.
All right. So that was the first time I'd ever mopped anything up besides the floor. I mean, certainly I'd gone through the gas chamber and boot camp, but I have a picture somewhere. I'll have to find it and send it to you. But it's a picture of everybody laid around a gun and on the gun line under the cami net and just frozen in time. It looks post-apocalyptic in full MOPP gear, and nobody wanted to move because it was so hot and it was so miserable in that MOPP gear. And, you know, I remember when we finally took those rubber boots off and left them off, I remember looking at my boots thinking, like, look how much sweat is in my boots. They're like a grayish black color, and it never went away. And it was just that we had sweated so much in those rubber boots that the dye from our socks had soaked into the leather of the boot and had made it gray. It was one of the worst experiences of my life that didn't involve being directly shot at, was sitting around in MOPP 2 for that long. There was a moment when I was thinking, you know what, if a mortar round wouldn't be that bad right now. I know where I'm going. I'm secure in my in eternity. Let's go ahead and drop that bad boy right now and get this over with. It was horrible.
And I guess I should have explained for our viewers out there that when we talk about MOPP, it's mission-oriented protective posture. There are 4 levels. MOPP 1 is you wear this chemical impregnated covering. And then MOPP 2, which we went into, you add to that chemical impregnated covering, you add these rubber over boots that go over your regular boots. And as Mark said, it makes your feet sweat like crazy and makes your feet miserable. And then MOPP 3, you would put on your gas mask with its hood. And if you went into MOPP 4, you would add these rubber gloves. So there were several times where we went into MOPP 4, in particular during those first 24 hours when there were some scuds launched. And so, you know, into MOPP 4 or MOPP 3, back down to MOPP 2. But again, we stayed in MOPP 2, as I mentioned, for about 3 weeks with those charcoal impregnated overalls and the hated rubber boots. Mike, what were your thoughts about that?
I never wanted to see, it may have contributed to why I decided to come back home and retire. Never want to experience that again. I remember that once the mop top and bottom, the suit, we did take them off and it kind of had a chance to dry out a little bit and everything. That gray charcoal liner was also, just impregnated with, salt, sweat and everything. And it would stand right up all by itself, so, but, it was part of the experience.
Yeah, I think the positive thing is it was like a giant odor eater. So the fact that we didn't take showers for 3 weeks, and for 111, it was more like 4 weeks, 4+. That was the one benefit is you didn't smell that bad because you had the charcoal impregnated garment that was soaking up all those, nasty smells from not showering and moving around and sweating and everything. James, anything you want to add on that?
The worst place to be in MOPP gear is on the gun line. Man, I think I lost about 80 pounds just being in that MOPP suit. It's worse than anything you can think of. I'd rather sit in an oven and just burn. I mean, that stuff, it was everywhere. We had the flak jackets on underneath. We were never allowed to take them off. Yeah, it was crazy. And we had this idea that we were going to put running shoes on. And we're like, nah, probably gonna get, with our luck though, like take them off and we're going to be walking around in skivvies and tennis shoes. So we ended up not doing that. We just kind of wished we always try to wish we were in a better place. Try to ignore it.
So that was the 18th of March. As I mentioned, H hours was supposed to be at 0300 on the 21st. Now we get to the 20th of March, and all of a sudden at 11:30 Zulu is the Iraqis decide they are going to fire across border. And so 11th Marines executes its intent and sends down a fire mission. The target was in the 211 and 111 zones. So we were going to fire a mass mission with 211 and 111. So James, let's now go back to where you were at when that mission came down.
There's a video out there with
There's
it.
video, and there is video out there from Bravo Battery's position of that first first fire mission. It's on. You can see it on our OIF reunion website, and also 11th Marines OIF1.com. So either place.
Yeah. So we were doing that stick breaking ceremony, and when we break that stick, he would the CO, Captain Gallerta, would have a bag, and we'd throw our stick, the family side of stick, and he goes that he wasn't going to give it back to us until we got back home, and then we can go be with our family. But at that time, we would switch the stick out. We'd leave our warrior side and go be with our family for the leave that we got, and then we'd come back and then we'd get our stick completed all over again, and we'd get ready for the next war. But we had just did the first portion of it, so half the battery went up there. They did their prayer, they did their stick breaking, and they went back to the gun line. And we were already doing it. And right when Captain Gallerta broke the sticks, he put them in. He goes, "All right, we're going to do our, it's our prayer time." Halfway through the prayer, we hear doosh, doosh, and we're like, "What was that?" And all of a sudden, just that one sound that every cannoneer can never get out of their head is that "Yeet." And FDC was yelling, "Hey, that's a fire mission. That's a no shit fire mission. Like, y'all need to get your asses back to the gun line." And we're like, "What? We're in MOPP gear, all of our crap on. The guns are literally 100 meters apart." And they're like, "Hey, run back. I'm gun 6. I gotta go back to gun 6." About what, 300 meters in a dead sprint, middle of the day, fire mission going. I'm getting goosebumps right now just remembering just that feeling. And then finally we get down there and they canceled the special instructions, and from that point on it was just the do. And it was crazy. I think I found out mistaken, I think it was a stick that we fired, and that was oh man, it felt like getting kicked by a mule in the chest. It was awesome. But yeah, it to this day it gives me goosebumps just hearing that beep. Our very first combat artillery fire.
Yeah, 11th Marines firing the first shots of the ground war at 11:30 Zulu on the 20th. Mike, you were back at the regimental CP. What were your thoughts? Did you hear that going down, or did you just all of a sudden hear the cannons going off?
Vaguely remember, I was somewhere close to probably wherever there was coffee, which was probably where there was a fire direction center, and when the mission came across. So I could be found close to FDC or any place that was making, had coffee brewing. So but yeah, knew for sure it was for real then. Just didn't think it was going to be for real. Like, can you believe these guys just did that?
Yeah,
These idiots just launched a couple mortars over this direction. But
yeah. So those were 120 mortars, and they got 111 and 211, and also again, when you go back and look at stuff, also the 7th Royal Horse Artillery was one of 2 British units that were attached to us, and they were in a reinforcing role to 211. So they also got into that mission. And I know those guys were eager to shoot because we had done our rehearsal on the 17th, and those guys had not fired a round in combat since 1956 during the Suez crisis, where that had been their last time in combat. So they were anxious, and they all through the rehearsal, they said, we're ready to go. We're available to shoot. So they,
nice.
Those rounds were the first rounds they had put down in, what was that, 47 years. So they were pretty excited about that. Mark, how about yourself? Where were you? Did you just all of a sudden hear cannons going off, or what were your?
No, I had the distinct pleasure to be way more involved than somebody in a headquarter battery you might think would have been. I mean, if you put yourself in my shoes as an ammo tech on the back of a 7-ton, and you remember how many times we were moving a day and dropping rounds, picking up rounds, dropping rounds, digging a new trench, dropping rounds, picking up rounds. I would love to do the math of how many tons, if not thousands of tons, I moved in that deployment from the ground to the back of a 7-ton back and forth. Well, when the fire mission came down, I was on the gun line with Bravo battery and one of the 7-tons dropping fuses at a gun. And I'll remember, of course, I've never heard that distinct whine from the anger. I've never heard of fire mission and all that. And I just remember sitting there, and I had hopped off the back of the 7-ton. I had some proximity fuses I was given to a chief, and all of a sudden you hear fire mission, and everybody went and stared at this little green box. And I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna stare at that box too. Fire mission sounds like a Marine thing to do. And it was the longest 3 seconds I've probably ever experienced until that section chief was like, expletive, move. This is real. And sure enough, we're right there, and I get pulled into it. I'm holding the little, I'm not a gun bunny, so I don't know what it's called, but the thing that holds the round that you can, by the 4th or 5th round, 4th or 5th round, I'm on the loading tray, and here we are going firing, of course, then my truck drives away from this fire mission with no windshield, busted headlights. Yeah. I mean, so from the very first fire mission till we transitioned out of here, we're driving around with these Vietnam-looking Arab goggles on and orange faces because we had no windshield because the Stick 8 blew our windshields out. I remember my nose bleeding from that fire mission. I mean, I walked away from that cannon thinking, man, that's.
I think you were on my gun at the time because I remember we were trying to sort through. Everything was happening so fast that we're just throwing stuff off the back of the truck, and we're like, dude, we need a VT fuse or something like that. I forgot what the name, what fuse we're looking for. And you were like, oh, I dropped it, dude. We're like, where? Oh, in there. Under all the HEs? Like, what? Those are wraps, and you got DPICMs in there. We're like, that's at the bottom?
Private first class in the Marine Corps, 5 months.
Yep.
Hey, but I was on a tray. The tray.
Hey, we got the rounds off, so that's all that mattered.
Yeah, so here we go. Like I say, the enemy cast its vote, and now, things are very, very real. What happened next is that I'm back at the Division CP. We're still on for our 0300 Zulu, attack. Well, now we roll into the afternoon, and right around about 14:30, 14:45, we get the call at the Division CP from MEF saying that, hey, we're getting intel that the Iraqis are getting ready to light off all the oil wells in southern Iraq, similar to what they had done in Kuwait during Desert Storm. So there was a concern that, we were going to have this huge environmental issue similar to that they had had in Desert Storm. So what the MEF asked is, how soon can the division attack? We want to move up the time of attack. So General Mattis got the regimental commanders together. Over the radio, he was talking to the infantry regimental commanders. I was there in the CP with him, and he basically polled them and said, when can you go? Colonel Dunford, CO of 5th Marine, said, hey, we're ready to go right now. We can go right now. 7th Marines, I forget what their answer was, but in particular, Colonel Dunford said, hey, we're ready to go. Now, when General Mattis turned to me and asked for my recommendation, I said to General Mattis, I said, well, General, we were supposed to have 8 hours of prep fires, aviation, rockets from the Army, followed by artillery, basically aimed at knocking out all of the artillery in Kuwait before we cross the line of departure. I said, if we go now, all that artillery is still going to be there. My recommendation is it's going to take us 2 hours to move for the regiment to move forward into its forward positions. And then we have a 30-minute counter fire program that we can execute against all of those Iraqi artillery positions. And my recommendation is that we make that move, we execute that 30-minute schedule of fires, and General Mattis concurred with that. So right at around 1500, he made the decision that H hour was going to be set for 1730 Zulu. So we're moved up, moved up 12 hours in the attack. Well, what that means is, again, artillery is going to have to carry the brunt of the fire support, because aviation, they couldn't recock all those air missions that were planned. And so we were going to be providing the preponderance of that fire support. So as a result, all of a sudden, that's what set in motion all you folks, moving forward and getting ready to fire those. It's gone down in history as the prep fires. Technically, it was a counter fire program that we fired. So at 1500 or 1700, we start that schedule of fires. And I went back and I looked. So 111, as part of those fires, fired on 3 targets, 2 Delta 30, which are 122 millimeter Soviet style howitzers, 2 battery positions, and 1 regimental CP. So against those 3 targets, you fired a battalion 10, a battalion 13, and a battalion 9 on those 3 targets. So James, what was it like? You all of a sudden you're displacing forward and getting ready to, fire that schedule. And, then like you say, we're ripping off long range fires. Tell me what it was like on the gun line.
Oh, it was awesome when we heard rocket off for the first time. I don't remember if that's when we did it, but I remember we loved to take off the firing caps off the wrap rounds. We thought, they were joking. Late great Baxter, First Sergeant Baxter, or at the time Staff Sergeant Baxter. I'm not sure if y'all are aware, but he's no longer with us anymore. But he was telling us, hey, we took out this, and this, and we were like, honestly, I think a lot of us still at that point on the gun line were still in disbelief that was actually happening. Like we were actually in a war. I mean, we're shooting rounds, down the other side of Iraq, pretty much 18.64 miles away. and you don't really get to see what you're shooting or what you're blowing up. So to us, we trained so well that it just didn't seem like combat yet. We weren't there yet. But it was awesome shooting those rounds, and we were doing some crazy things, and some of the things that, you know, we weren't supposed to be doing, you know, a lot of, you know, SOPs that were kind of kicked dirt on top of, and, you know, not saying it was a good thing, but it happens. So we would literally shorten our lanyards and attach them to the actual breech, because if the lanyard fell and that dust, when you shot those sticks, that dust would kick up and you couldn't see, you know, 2 feet in front of you because of that dust, and that dust would settle and you just lost a lanyard that looks the same color as the dirt. So we had to shorten them just enough to where when we opened the breech, that it would barely touch the ground and we were still able to fire. But I think things were just happening so fast.
Well, talk about those volumes of fire, as I mentioned, you know,
They happened
Battalion
quick.
10, a Battalion 13. That's typically not what you'd shoot back in Las Pulgas or on training evolutions. So that had to be kind of motivating for you.
It was, I mean, it was a kind of one of those out of body experiences. It's just, you know, when you're playing football and you go play at the Dallas Cowboy Stadium for a state championship, it almost feels just so surreal. But to be able to do those kind of things, and then and they tell us that it's at my command. So that first round is at my command. Everything after that is win ready.
It's the
like,
best.
Heck yeah. So just way too much excitement going through us. I probably, you know, pissed my drawers. I probably didn't even know about it because I was so sweaty anyways, but it was just fun. I mean, it was unbelievable. Like I can sit there and tell these stories to these young Marines or these young OIF 11s. They're probably like, "Oh, you're lying. Y'all didn't shoot that." Like, yeah, we did. But it was I hate to say it because of where they went. As a Christian man, I hate saying that I had fun, but honestly, it was something else. I mean, I thinking back on it now, it sucks, you know, because some people, you know, people have to die. It's a war, people die. But at the same time, we did have some fun with it because we didn't know exactly what we were doing until later on, about a week into it, when we started actually coming to, because we didn't actually have time to eat. So from that first round that we fired from the counter battery to the point where we started doing all this other shooting, we completely forgot about eating. We didn't care about that, wasn't on our mind. So a lot of times we were just tired, hungry, thirsty, and having fun. Like, how can you be having fun and you're this dang hungry? But it was a memorable time.
You know, over the last couple of weeks, as we've all been watching the events in Ukraine and the Soviets and their struggles, one thing that I've kind of thought back on is it makes me really feel really kind of bad about what it must have been like for the Iraqis, because
Yeah.
you see the Soviets, you know, struggling, or I should say the Russians, you know, showing my age, calling them Soviets, but you see the Russians struggling to, you know, put rounds on target, and I think of how proficient we were, and not only with putting the rounds on target, but with the lethality of the rounds we were putting on target and the volume that we were putting on target. You know, it really, again, makes me feel a little bit sorry for those folks that had to fight us. And by the same token, say, wow, if the 11th Marines, if we were supporting the Ukrainians right now, we'd be having a field day. So,
oh, I know, it'd be the Kuwait war all over again on Highway to Hell. Just, oh, screw it, fire it. It's gonna hit somebody.
So Mark, you talked about the fact you're slinging that, picking up those rounds, putting them down, but at the same time, those things you're seeing them consumed at the cyclic rate. What were your thoughts as those first missions were going down range with that volume of fire?
Well, I had an interesting shop I joined. So, you know, at headquarters battery, their ammo techs, there was only 3 of us. And one of them was Staff Sergeant Bland, who just come off DI duty. I don't know if y'all remember him. He was a character. And then a private who had been busted down for drugs right before the deployment. And then I show up at PFC. And so there was very few of us in my little group, and Staff Sergeant Bland wanted us on the gun lines as much as possible, making sure they had what they need. So, I mean, we were in the thick of it. And because we were going to each one of these gun lines all the time, we had such a unique perspective to see the totality of all these different pauses and where the guns were. So I had an acute awareness of just how many rounds, because I touched all of them, unfortunately, to the chagrin of my back to these days. And so I truly could appreciate when I'm hearing these rounds going off, or I'm at one gun helping do whatever I can do. I have this very clear mental picture of just how many guns that is, where they are. I could visualize in my mind all those rounds converging on these various points. And you know, once again, having a very distinct appreciation for the weight of a wrap round or an HEDP round, in knowing just how many of those were there. I remember thinking, like, God, it must be hell on earth to be on the other end of what we're sending down range right now.
Mike, you know, you must have been, again, hating life at this point, all those rounds going down range, and you're not directly part of it.
Yeah, like I said, it's the one thing that I look back on. It's kind of like a couple episodes ago when Casey, when Captain Harsh said that, you know, the time he did his B-billet and became the adjutant, at least he stayed with 11th Marines. You know, it was a blessing, but at the same time, it wasn't, because he wasn't acting in an 0803 capacity. I have that same kind of a feeling about it. It's I did pull, I can't remember which battery it was. I did pull a lanyard a couple of times. It was when we were up in past the Fertile Valley, and there were some gun positions that were in that heavy green wheat fields, and we were close enough that I went down to a couple of, you know, guns during fire missions and stuff. But yeah, a lot of, you know, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but yeah, I would have much rather been a battery gunny. Honestly, I would have rather have been a section chief, is what I would have rather have been. Section chief had the best job during that. As far as the, you know, the shooting the 10, 12, and 9 round or 13 and 9 round missions, you know, a well-trained, you know, gun crew, that's just joy, because that gun line sitting there, you know, first one to call, you know, back, rounds complete, and then hearing the FDC, you know, cutting back on, okay, what about it, number 2? What about it, number 2? Where you at? Where, you know, there's always that gun that you know, everybody's waiting on, you know, and then maybe a minute or two later, you know, finally calls rounds complete. But yeah, the camaraderie and the jesting between the gun lines, and one of the things Mark said, I always remember, and I know it's true, as true today as it was 30 years ago, but the ammo techs, the 2111s, they were always under my net. As a, you know, they drop off the rounds, they go park their truck, they put the net up, and then they get farmed down to a gun line, you know, to help out. So
my MOS instructor had a gunnery sergeant at Redstone Arsenal, and 2 of us in our class got to pick. Now, there was no guarantee. We got to pick what type of unit we were going to go to, and most ammo techs are ASP Marines. They're just driving a forklift somewhere doing a warehouse job, and then I think 5 or 10% of us get to be using unit techs. And typically, if you excel in MOS school, you would pick one of those things. And I remember asking, I had the opportunity to be at the top of my class, and I asked the gunnery sergeant, and I said, "What's the hardest job as an ammo tech?" And I expected him to say infantry. And he said, artillery. And I was kind of surprised. I was like, why artillery? He said, well, we call it force artillery instead of force reconnaissance. And I was like, why? I said, because artillery is forced to do everything. Because if you're an artillery, as an ammo tech, guess what? You're going to be an artilleryman too. And as an artilleryman, you're going to be infantry. You're going to be convoy security. You're going to be EOD security. You're going to be resupply. And sure enough, I did all of those things in country and in combat. And he was very accurate about that statement. And so even as the Pogey 2311 pulled plenty of lanyards, and that deployment, and then the second time we went over there for Fallujah. So it was very true, my gunnery sergeant.
Now, the battalion continues to fire until it, prior to crossing the border, you guys fired 10 more missions. You fired 2 battalion 2s, 5 battalion 3s, 2 battalion 4s, 1 battalion 6, all of those with base burn DPICM. And then you fired a battalion 6 with HE quick. So during that time, you were shooting at Delta 30 batteries, AP armored personnel carriers. And also you had engaged an infantry battalion digging in.
Yep.
The BDA that came back on that was numerous secondary explosions, fires, and estimated casualties too many to count. So, again, 11th Marines was raining some death and destruction on the enemy and paving the way for the infantry to move forward. So by the time you crossed the border, the battalion 111 had already fired 1,332 rounds. And if you break it down, each howitzer in the battalion put 72 rounds down range. Most of those long range, supercharge 8s and sticks. And because our tactical plan was to engage them with long range fires where we could stand off outside of the range of the Iraqi artillery. We had a range advantage over them and basically pound them with impunity. And so that's part of the reason that we fired so many long range munitions. The other part was those were the munitions that came off the MPF shipping. So there were preponderance of over half of the rounds that came off MPF shipping were long range rounds, base burn DPICM wrap, and with the associated long range powders. So you fire all those missions and then making the move and going through the berm. So into Iraq. So James, why don't you tell us what were your thoughts, if any? Maybe you were just too tired. I don't know. What were you thinking going into, you're crossing through that border and you're into Iraq? What were your thoughts?
We were tired. I mean, it felt like we were firing all night. I mean, I remember when that first round went off after nightfall or after sunset, man, we couldn't see anything. The dust had kicked up. We were literally running into each other. I remember turning around after firing 2 sticks. I turned around. It was this Lance Corporal Vasquez was coming running at me as a powder monkey with a stick, and he didn't see me and I didn't see him. He put a stick propellant right in my chest, knocked the air clean out of my lungs, and they're yelling, "Are you ready? Are you ready?" So yeah, I mean, we were just straight tired, and it was just over and over. And I know how you say those missions that we did, to some people it may sound like, oh, there was probably a lot of time in between, but by the time it came down to us, man, there was hardly any time to do anything other than what you were supposed to do. And by 75% of the way, we were basically running on memory, muscle memory, things that we knew what to do. Like our bodies knew how to, raise the tube, drop the tube, close the breech, slap the firing mech, and you could do all these things with your eyes closed by that point. So we were tired, and by the time I don't actually remember waking up. I remember seeing a tank on the Kuwait side, and then seeing the berm. We're like, holy crap, it's right there. Like, what's going on? We were just so deadbeat tired, and we just saw the Iraqis or the Kuwaitis on their tanks and all that. We're like, dude, are those the bad guys? Because we didn't know. We were just straight tired. We didn't eat anything. We weren't really drinking water. We were just more concentrating on what the mission was. And then we were going to do some shut-eye, like do a 50-50 in back of the truck. But they said, oh, we're going through the berm. You need to stay awake. Like, again, here we go with this again. And I just remember going through there. I saw the no man's land, the fence, the berm was kind of cool. I mean, it was a big berm. We didn't think that. We thought it was just gonna be a 6-foot berm or something, but no, it was pretty big, and it was kind of exciting going through it. We're like, dude, now we're in it. That's when we started like, okay, now we're in the cage. And the only way out of this cage is the other end of the cage. So we got to get through this. And that's just the way we looked at it. And it was kind of exciting and cool, I guess. Yeah, kind of just being part of history.
Mark, you said you were up manning a gun on a 7-ton. So any thoughts as were crossing into Iraq?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that I was on a 240 Golf, and it's interesting, when we transitioned over, I'm not sure what everybody else got, but I had a Vietnam era flak jacket that didn't hold SAPI plates. I mean, I didn't have SAPI, it didn't even hold SAPI plates. I remember rolling it up at night and sleeping on it because it was so soft. And sitting on top of, it was actually a Humvee that I was on when we crossed the border with the 240 Golf. And of course, at the time, we didn't really have a bunch of up armored anything. And it was very surreal, like you said, it felt like you're going in one end of a tunnel and there was no coming back this way. And it was really hard to wrap your mind. I'll never forget the way that night smelled, and maybe some of you can appreciate what I'm talking about. But that hot metal and dust, and there's just a very specific smell. And there's been a handful of times in my life that I've smelled something very similar to that, and it is like a full body jolt of emotion and awareness and hypervigilance. The way that going across that border, sitting on behind that gun and really not knowing what we were going into. I mean, some of this gets lost in the political discussions, but at the time we were legitimately concerned that they had, weapons of mass destruction, that they had chemical weapons. And I mean, I remember sitting and watching this video about blister agents in Kuwait before we left, and about nerve agents and all these things that we could face. And those things are running through your mind, like that, this is all very real, and it's all happening right now. And you mentioned something a second ago that you were kind of operating off muscle memory. Well, I didn't have the benefit of muscle memory, so I was very conscious about everything I was doing, and there was this concern that I was going to screw something up with my inexperience. That was going to be very bad, and thankfully I was surrounded by people who knew what they were doing and kept me from making those mistakes. And you learn pretty quickly in that kind of pressure. But it was a very surreal moment to cross that border on a machine gun and into real war. We had certainly been firing and it had been real, but only God knew what was on the other side of that berm. And here we were going to face it.
Yeah, I think Mark brought up a good point that, here we are almost 20 years later. It's interesting to think back on how little personal protection we actually had. SAPI plates didn't really exist. There were some folks had them that had been on, some of the infantry folks that had been on the Muse had SAPI, and for our people watching, SAPI, SAPI is small arms protective inserts. They're the thick plates that get inserted into your flak jacket and can stop small arms rounds. Without that, the flak jacket really is designed to protect you from fragmentation, artillery fragmentation, or mortar fragmentation, but it will not protect you and will not stop a small arms round. So SAPI plates didn't exist for 95% of the division, certainly not for 11th Marines. Those all came later. Also, all our vehicles, we had soft side vehicles.
Yeah.
If you had sides.
Vinyl canvas doors, none of the protective armor kits that later got added on. We did have some up armored Humvees that were designed for certain members of the batteries. I think each battery had 3 on its table of organization, but all of those up armored vehicles and personal protective equipment that you saw later in Operation Iraqi Freedom II and beyond, that didn't exist when we were heading up to the march up to Baghdad and crossing into bad guy country. Mike, what were your thoughts going as we were pushing forward across into Iraq?
Kind of along the same things you were just talking about with the SAPI plates, the soft-sided vehicles. you know, our additional protection was that we were filling sandbags, but you couldn't put too many sandbags in the bottom of the vehicle because otherwise, you know, then your knees were up over the top of where the windows were. You know, I remember there was some place back at Matilda that that had a boatload of old or extra artillery flak jackets, and we were putting those in the bottoms of our vehicles as well to add some form of additional protection on the bottom. As far as going through the berm, all I can really remember is, and part of it's because of all the pictures that I took out that side, and the flash suppressor or the flash hider of like M16 that I checked out at Matilda because I went over there with the pistol, in the distance, and that soft sided. But what I do remember almost all the time inside the vehicle, physically there was, tapping Ortiz, our driver, on the shoulder, from time to time because he was getting distracted, and he's a younger guy, and he's also a communicator, so he's trying to listen to what's going on the radio at the same time. And I can't remember what it's called, but we had that relatively brand new, frequency jumping high speed communications and the XO. Our vehicle had one of those ones, the green screen things.
Oh, Blue Force tracker?
MDAX.
Yeah, that was brand new. I mean,
Right.
I'm sure, when I retired in 2004, everybody probably had it. That was my only experience with seeing that. So what I remember is my focus was between tapping Ortiz on the shoulder. I was listening to what Colonel Malillo was saying or talking, who he was talking to on the radio, and what was coming over that Blue Force tracker, because I was kind of enthralled with it because it was a new technology to me, and it was the first I'd seen it. So
Yeah, there were, again, looking back it's amazing how some of that stuff, we hadn't really had a chance to train on it because a lot of it got fielded while we were in Kuwait back at Matilda. So things like we had a limited number of Blue Force trackers. I actually had in my vehicle what was called an MDAC, which was another device, certainly not as capable as a Blue Force tracker, but good enough for me to maintain my SA because I wanted to make sure that the three had the Blue Force tracker in his vehicle. So yeah, a lot of new stuff that came out back then that we take for granted today.
Yeah. Y'all were talking about sandbags. I remember we had to fill the whole bottom of the 7 tons in the back, put 2 layers of sandbags down on the bottom, and then you had to put 2 rolls on the side, and there was literally no room back there. And you had the combat load. We were supposed to be 10 rounds, but we were moving so fast. I think at some point we had 48 rounds in back of our truck because we had to move so quick, and ammo techs couldn't get there fast enough to pick it up. And a lot of people don't realize too, we actually had our own ammo trucks per gun, and we still didn't have enough ammunition sometimes. But it was so heavy, and forgot where we were. I think it was right after we fired the first rounds on the berm. We had our gunner for the Mark 19 lose the stud bolt on the 50 cal. So he was like, I don't know what to do. And he didn't want to say anything. So we ended up rolling in to when we went through the berm without a 50 cal, inoperable 50 cal. And then we got to a position, and one of the ammo techs, Navajo, was, hey, we got a Mark 19. Like, what? Where? Oh, back in the trailer. Since when? Oh, since we got here. We had 3 minutes when they gave us a CSMO to go get the Mark 19, break it down, clean it out, put the different mount on top of the 7 ton because the Mark 19 is different from the 50 cal, get it mounted, run a functions check, and then, load it with ammunition. Well, we got it up on the truck. And by the time we got it up on the truck, we looked around like, hey, who's ready to shoot? And I was a corporal at the time. I was looking at the younger Marines. I'm too old to die at that point. You kind of need your leadership before you need your PFCs, and it's an ugly way to look at it, but it is what it is. And everybody was too damn scared, so I ended up jumping up on there. I'm like, I'll do this. I want a division shoot for Mark 19. I'll do it.
And I remember them saying, I was like, man, I just hope to God that they say Alpha order. And they came back, said Zulu order, gun 6 first. And when I went to go charge the gun, it didn't even go. And I was like, where's the LSAT? And they're like, oh, LSAT? It's in the United States still. We're like, what the hell are we supposed to use? I remember having to use COP can, and I was squirting the living heck out of that Mark 19, and finally got one round to come back. And then I went to squeeze the trigger to let the bolt go forward, got stuck again. And next thing you know, Fernandez in the lead vehicle starts opening up, and I'm on top of the Mark 19 on a 7-ton, getting shot at with no gun in my hand. And I'm just like, this is gonna suck. I'm gonna die on top of this truck with no sandbags around me. I think I had one sandbag on my left and one sandbag on my right that I would use to put my feet on in order to kind of traverse it. But we had like no protection at all. And people are like, aren't you scared? I'm like, look, man, if a bullet goes through this Mark 19, it probably deserves to kill me. Yeah. But yeah, and nowadays they have all that other stuff. I even seen that they came out with Kevlar shorts. Y'all seen those? That was nuts. But yeah, we didn't have any protection at all.
So we're off then. We go through and the race is on to Baghdad, and we'll be talking about that in future sessions. Before we sign off here, anyone have anything they want to, they've thought about that they want to add to what we've already talked about that first, 24 to 36 hours of the fight?
I'm not sure if y'all remember, but when you were talking about the 2 mortar rounds when Iraqis fired, we had Baxter, Staff Sergeant Baxter in the FDC. When we were doing that stick breaking ceremony, our counter battery radar went down, and we were supposed to have that up in order for us to, to catch the counter battery. Well, for some reason, we still got the mission, and Baxter was able to get that fire mission or get that location of those rounds, and then do his work, his magic with the FDO. And they were able to get the fire mission for us. And the reason that's kind of why we went by round, or was it by gun at my command, or per gun, I forgot what the command was, but every gun was going to get a different quadrant, a different deflection, and different time on their HE rounds. When everybody else got the straight mission straight to their GDU, we couldn't get it because our combat or our counter battery radar went down. But Baxter was able to compute all that data in the same amount of time that it took actual counter battery to pick it up and send it to the gun line. I mean, we were probably about a couple seconds off, but man, that guy knew his stuff, and I really wish he was around to be able to tell that story, because nobody knows about our counter battery going down and him being able to compute it with the minimal Marines that he had.
Yeah, it's great story. Mark, anything, any save rounds you want to talk about?
No, not really. I mean, I think we've touched on most of the big topic things. It was interesting. I guess the last little thing I'll add is going from, so much happened in that first 4 or 5 days that, the way I was treated. We've all been the boot. It didn't matter if you're an officer or enlisted. I mean, we've all been the boot. We know what that means. And it was really interesting. Of course, I was still the boot. I was still obviously the boot, aesthetically with different camis than everybody else. But just in that first 5 days, I think had the transition between how I was, I think most people as a PFC new to a ground combat unit in the Marine Corps, they have to wear that badge of boot for probably quite some time, maybe even to the next wave of boots come in. There was no wave of new boots in country, right? But I'll never forget, and I'll always appreciate just how rapidly living through these fire missions, living through these small arms engagements as we crossed the border, and having the honor of serving beside the Marines of 1st Battalion, 11th Marines, how quickly I became part of the whole, and the rest was sort of history as the rest of the deployment and then future deployments in my 4 years with 111 lived out, how quickly people really pulled me in and accepting it. And I learned that, we're all warriors, and if you were willing to wear that hat and do that job, that you'd be accepted even as a PFC with Nintendo camouflage on.
Mike, anything you want to add? Last closing thoughts?
Only thing I guess I would say would be for people watching this, moving into future installments, if you wanted to participate in it, you're like me and you didn't throw anything away, and you got a small section box in your garage with every TM you've ever owned, still in it and whatnot. Go dig through that stuff, and because you'll probably come across some things that that would have some relevance. I was shocked that I hadn't looked in that box in more than a decade, but leading up to this, to find some CMC messages talking about stop loss and things like that transpired going up to it. The tippers messages that I got, stuff for people I worked reenlistments on, meeting minutes, things that were discussed. It's got to be kept somewhere, and when I'm gone, my kids are going to open this up and they're going to throw it all in the trash, unfortunately. So
yeah, but it's, the one thing that's important to talk about too is, with all this going on, there was also routine stuff going on. Like we say, we were still working reenlistments. I remember that I think we had closed out the FTAP in either January or early February in country, because I remember telling General Mattis that we were closed out and had met our goal for that fiscal year. So that stuff didn't stop. So.
No, I've got the dates, which battalions, how many reenlistments were conducted there. My little, NCO book, that I had over there has got, day by day, this date, and if I had the access to go back to radar somewhere where you could talk to the world and send a message back to Headquarters Marine Corps and work on a reenlistment, or some of it was using the Iridium phone, while we were over there. Trying to get something worked out for someone, especially in country, because those were tax-free bonuses for a lot of folks, but really got some interesting stuff out of that in here that relates to the CMOC, Civil Military Operations Center. Once we got there, that I've got some things that would be interesting to talk about when we get to that.
Oh, yeah, we'll talk about that in a future session also.
Yep.
So once again, I want to thank you all for taking time out of your schedules to join us today. I hope you've had as much fun as I had over this session, thinking back to now 19 years ago. And it's amazing how time flies, and it's great reliving some of those memories. And thanks for sharing it with not only me, but with also our viewers. So once again, thanks. On future sessions, we'll be talking about the Great Orange Crush on Highway 1. We'll talk about operations moving up Highway 6 and some of the big missions we fired outside of Baghdad. And then we will talk about some of the transition where, 11th Marines, we do windows. So we became own some sectors in zones in Baghdad and shifted over. One day we were launching rounds down range. The next day we're doing civil military affairs in Baghdad. And then finally, we'll talk about in a future session our trip home. So thanks again for joining us today. Those of you who are 11th Marines veterans, if you want to participate in future events, let us know. We'd love to hear from you and get you involved in a future session. So thanks a lot, gents.
Yeah.